Behind every successful endeavor in life is a relationship built on trust. Welcome to The Trust Doctor, restoring trust and enriching significant relationships. A podcast focused on helping you nurture healthy relationships. Join thought leader and world-renowned expert on relationship and empowerment coaching, Dr. Patty Ann, and her special guests every week for insightful and meaningful conversations filled with great takeaways that will help you build healthier business partnerships and happier romantic relationships. Are you ready to restore trust and enrich the significant relationships in your life? The Trust Doctor, Dr. Patty Ann, is in.
Welcome to today's podcast episode of The Trust Doctor, restoring trust and enriching significant relationships. And I cannot tell you how excited I am for today's guest. She is going to wow you. But before we go any further, since I know you're going to love this episode and this podcast, if you're a first-time listener, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to The Trust Doctor. So today we have an incredible, powerful woman who is changing lives as she changes the leadership of companies. She has provided strategies and systems that really drive the workplace. I know this is the buzz term today, but she has been talking about equity and inclusion for over 20 years as she was an executive for that company every woman listening to this podcast has heard of. And if you guys want to stay in your intimate relationships, you've heard of them too. Hallmark. She is a sought-after consultant, speaker, and leadership experience designer that helps leaders and organizations define a vision and develop strategies to advance their culture and leadership goals. And she has just come out with a book called The Waymakers. And when this podcast is over, you will be able to Google and find out so much more about her. But for now, buckle up because Tara Jaye Frank is about to take us for a ride. Welcome, Tara, and thank you so much for agreeing to be on this podcast today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm all revved up now. I'm ready to go.
Woo-hoo. Okay, so we were talking a little bit offline because, you know, I love to talk to people, and you have such an interesting background. So tell us how you got to where you are today.
How I got to where I am physically or where I am professionally?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
Whatever you want to talk about.
Well, yeah, I was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I went to school at a historically Black women's college in Atlanta, Georgia. I went to Spelman, spent 17 years in Kansas City at Hallmark Cards. I was actually there for 21, but I lived in Kansas City for 17 of those.
Is that where that corporate is?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay.
Yeah. And then almost a decade ago, I moved to Dallas, Texas. So I live in Dallas now with my husband and two of our 6 children and our 3 dogs. And I essentially run my consultancy where I basically work with high-level executives, helping them to, number 1, better understand their workplace culture today. Number 2, define an aspirational culture. And then 3, build a bridge between those 2 points. So that's how I have traveled through this country. Logistically, I'll say the professional story is a lot more complicated.
You traveled as you were creating your brand, right? Because who you are today is the compound of who you were in the past. So you mentioned, there's so much to talk about. So let's talk about Hallmark, right? Like for example, I love Valentine's Day, and I know it's made up. Hallmark, I know, made Valentine's Day up. I know it's fake, but it worked. It's like one of my favorite holidays. I know I love it. And that's probably because of Hallmark. So how did that come? How did you end up at Hallmark at a school? And how did you stay there and climb the corporate ladder?
Yes, good question. So I actually don't believe Hallmark made up Valentine's Day. I need to go back
Tell
into the
me.
archives on that one.
Well,
So
I'm sort of kind of being sarcastic, but
I know, I know, I
I
know.
think there is a Saint Valentine. Not
There
don't
is,
quote,
there is
yeah,
a
don't
story
quote me
there.
on that. Don't
If
quote me on
anybody's
that.
interested, they can certainly search the internet for that
Right.
origin story. But yeah, for me, interestingly, I actually started writing poetry when I was 6 years old. So I
She's a
always joke.
poet too. She's a poet too. What does this woman not do?
Well, that's kind of what led me, into my Hallmark career. But I was writing from a very young age. I had my first poem published in the newspaper at 6. It was terrible, but
What
still.
was it about? What was it about?
Oh my goodness.
Come
It was
on.
called Fish in the Water. And
Do you
please don't
remember
make
it?
me don't make
Can
me
you
recite
recite it?
it.
Yes, please.
Okay, it started with fish in the water, fish in the pond. One little fish was just born. One little fish was sleeping. The other little fish was weeping. One little fish was trying. The other little fish was dying. It was very sad.
That is so like, oh my God, I have goosebumps. That can be so deep if you look at it that it's like the whole circle of life.
Here's the thing though. I mean, we're laughing, but let me say, because you asked a really important question about how did I get to where I am?
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is, from a very young age, I was also just really introspective and reflective, right? About everything, about people, about how people interacted with one another, what made people happy, what made people sad. And so by the time I was 14, I already knew I wanted to work for Hallmark. I wanted to write greeting cards for Hallmark. That's what I wanted to do. So when I went to Spelman and I was an English major, it was my junior year. Now, mind you, Dr. Patty Ann, the internet was not a thing when I first went to college. So I didn't know where Hallmark was. I knew I wanted to end up there, but I didn't know where in the country it was or how to get to people who were there. But my junior year at Spelman, I was sitting in Shakespeare and I sat.
To be or not to be at Hallmark.
I was sitting in my Shakespeare class and my professor, Dr. Christine Sizemore, starts reading the announcements. And she's just reading them. And then I hear her say, Hallmark Cards will be here on such and such date recruiting for interns. And I was like, oh, she's talking to me. So as soon as class was over, exactly, I ran to the the career placement center. I said, I understand Hallmark will be here. I've wanted to work there forever. Can I be their tour guide? Can I have lunch with them? They allowed me to do that. And quite literally, the rest was history. So I got the internship between my junior and senior year as a greeting card writer.
Which is huge. Wait, you were actually writing, you weren't getting coffee?
No, I started as a writer. Yeah.
A lot of internships, you're getting coffee.
I know. And it was such a beautiful internship for that reason, honestly. Like we did real work. I will tell you, my summer between junior and senior year, I actually got, I think the highest number of writing acceptances any writing intern had ever received to that point was like fewer than 20. That summer, I got 61 acceptances. And I was offered a job the August of my senior year. So I spent my entire senior year pretty much just waiting to graduate so that I could go start my dream job.
Oh,
so
right. You never went to a keg party.
No.
That is amazing. That really is incredible. I mean, you're making light of it, but if you know how internships work, first of all, it might have been a little bit less difficult back in the day, right? Because but you were already ahead of the curve. People didn't really realize how important internships were to getting that first job off of school. But you knew how to develop the relationship. You said, you did what anybody successful does. I'll do anything.
Right. What can I do? Yeah. How do I position myself, right, near the people who make the kinds of decisions, right, who could change my future?
Right. So where did that wisdom at such a young age come from? That's wisdom, right? Mastery is wisdom applied to life. How did you do that?
I love that. That's nice.
That wasn't mine. I heard it somewhere. Mastery is wisdom applied to life. I can't for the life of me remember where I read it or heard it.
It makes a lot of sense. And I wish I could answer that question with clarity for you. I will tell you that my mother always used to say to me when I was young, "You've been here before." That was the way, older people
Old soul,
said.
you're an old soul.
Yes, that I was an old soul. She always used to say, "You've been here before." And, I think I spent a lot of time, first of all, around adults. I was not a very social little person. I was very, I say shy. I characterized it as shy then. I learned later that it was anxiety, but I just was attached to my mother pretty much all the time. And I went where she went, and I
You an only
overheard
child?
the conversations she had.
Were you an only child?
No, I had 2 older brothers.
Oh, boys. Okay.
Yeah, just like I was always listening. I guess that's probably the only thing I can point to, and that I believe I had an innate gift for language, and for shaping
I have
that.
to interrupt you for a second. I have to tell you something, and I can't remember who it was. I interviewed somebody pretty successful, but I can't remember who it was. And I asked him a similar question, not exactly the way I asked you, but I think I said it much less eloquently, like, how'd you get so smart, right? And what he told me was he came from a very traditional, old school, stereotypical Italian family. And he said, we used to be at the beach all the time. And I used to always be around my mother and all her sisters and all my aunts. And he said, I used to listen exactly what you just said. And he just learned so much wisdom.
Yeah, well, you definitely pick that up. And I also think it shapes your views of the world. It frames situations for you if you listen long enough and intently enough. And so I was just really curious. I was always really curious, and I still am. I think that's what allows me to do the work I do, just that curiosity.
Okay, so you get into Hallmark, and you just like catapult yourself up the food chain, I call it.
Yeah.
So what are some of the, and we will get to your book, I promise. But I want people to see how this doesn't happen overnight, right?
True story.
True story, right? So what are some of the things that just sucked about being there? Like times you would, even for you, there must have been days when you went home and you're like, what on God's green earth am I doing here? How can that person be so fill in the blank, insensitive, stupid, a moron? How did they get to where they are, being who they are? So share. Okay.
I hope you believe me when I say that I had very few of those moments in my Hallmark career. Generally, Hallmarkers, as we called ourselves.
I like that.
Are among
movie-ish. Like you're a group, right?
I mean, are among the nicest people I've ever met. It makes sense. What a great
compliment for a company culture. What a great compliment.
But yes, so very nice people, generally speaking, very warm, very open, very caring. That is the nature of the business, so it's not really that surprising. However, nice isn't always what we need in our leaders at every stage of the game. Sometimes what we need in our leaders, as you well know, is transparency. Sometimes what we need is directness. Sometimes what we need
passionate transparency,
is coaching, right? Is courage, right? Is risk-taking. And so there were times in my career, certainly, where I felt like I wasn't getting exactly what I needed, but it was never, the whole, that person's such a jerk. There were just very few jerks in that culture. And quite honestly, when they were jerks, they didn't last very long.
Awesome.
The culture was not very tolerant of that.
Okay, so that's great, but I'm going to get to the dirt though. So
please,
when there were times though, share one time where what you were presented with or the situation that you were in, did not give you, was not compatible with what you needed to succeed.
Perfect example. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Okay. So when I was about 25, I was the editorial director for a product line that we
25? At 25, you're the editorial director. Did you hear that, listeners? Go ahead.
for a product line that we created in partnership with Dr. Maya Angelou.
Oh.
So I was Dr. Angelou, essentially her voice, her translator, right? I was her editorial person, her partner. I took very much to heart my responsibility to translate her writing, her poetry into greeting card format. So at Hallmark, you work with art directors, like word people work with visual people. Everything's very partner based. And I had an art director who had been at Hallmark a lot longer than I had been there. She was very experienced, really brilliant, but in this partnership where I focused on the words and she focused on the visuals, she was used to making all of the visual calls. And all the visual calls would certainly be icons and colors, but also fonts and text layout and all of that. But in this case, because the product line was really based on a poet, and the way the font you choose and the way you lay out poetry affects the tone, right? Affects the mood, affects the overall feel of it. I had asked to be able to weigh in to the text decisions, right? To the font, the lettering decisions, the layout decisions. I asked for that because I knew that mattered in terms of how people were going to receive the words on the other end. And so she kind of just like, okay, but then time and again, she continued to make these calls without me. And I asked a couple more times, please don't make the calls without me. I think it's important that I weigh in. She refused to do it. So I called her. I asked her if we could talk in a conference room. And we went into the conference room and I said, I've asked repeatedly if I can be engaged in this decision-making process. Please help me understand why you are not including me in that process. Is there something that I'm doing? Is there something I can do differently? This is really important, et cetera. And she just broke down crying, which, is something that happens, quite honestly, to Black women at work a lot. When we name our boundary, sometimes people on the other side get emotional.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's just Black women. I think that's been my experience to coaching executive women, period.
Yeah, women. Yeah. It does. If you look at the research, Black women report having this happen to them at much higher rates, okay. But I can completely see how it may happen to anyone. But yeah, she just kind of melted down. And in my mind, I'm simply asking for mutual respect.
Was she a Black woman?
No, she was a white woman.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure because you were going from her melting down and crying. So, and then you talked about Black women melting down and crying. So I thought there was a connection.
No, she was,
okay. That's my point, the women.
Yeah. Right, Black women, when we try to express a boundary at work. So that kind of went south. But I had other moments like that.
What do you mean by that? That relationship you couldn't continue to work together with her?
We worked together because we had a job to do. And we were both.
Did she include you in the decisions?
Moving forward, she did include me in the decisions. She begrudgingly. But honestly, at that point, I was okay with that. I really needed to be included in the decisions more than I needed her to do it happily.
Right. So, but I so get that as someone that reads poetry, I dare say a lot, but
yeah,
I know
it matters.
I know enough about poetry to know that its presentation is part of what resonates with the reader, right? I get that.
Think about just the line breaks.
Yeah.
Think about how important that is, right? When you read really good poetry, those line breaks are so intentional. So anyway, that was part of
when you read a book, right? It's different paragraphs, but there's different forms of writing poetry, like haiku, and that's about all I know. But the format suggests how it shows up. So I get that. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Yep. For sure. But yeah, there were a few of those, but there weren't a ton. I generally had a really great experience. But it wasn't necessarily a place where we had hard conversations as often as we probably should have. because
And
those
that
nice,
that's consistent. That's consistent in corporate, period.
yes,
Right?
especially in the Midwest. I find
Oh,
Midwestern companies, especially.
wait, Minnesota nice. Where was Hallmark?
Yeah, Kansas City.
Kansas City. Okay, that's not
Yeah.
Minnesota. Yeah, okay. Anyway, all right. So let's fast forward.
Mhm.
And what I don't know the story behind you leaving Hallmark to move to
To
Dallas.
Dallas. Mhm.
I don't know, is the time frame where people, I would imagine you can work remotely in Hallmark, right?
Well, no, it was actually a really pointed story. To be honest with you, I had gotten divorced. I had 3 young children. I reconnected with someone that I had been friends with in college. We decided
On
we wanted to get
Facebook?
married.
On
Yeah,
Facebook.
it was on Facebook, actually.
Yeah, that's what
He'll
happened.
say it was on MySpace, but that's not how I remember it.
What's MySpace? I have to look that up. I'm not old enough to know MySpace.
The precursor. But yeah, we decided we wanted to blend families, and that was going
You
to
said someone from high
necessitate a
school.
move.
You said someone from high school.
College.
Oh, from okay. So that, yeah.
Yeah. So
Long
that
distance
really changed
relationship.
things.
Long distance.
Yeah, for a while. Yeah, for a little bit.
Years.
We did long distance for 2 years.
Oh, that's a long time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then we got married and I moved to Dallas, and I honestly assumed I was going to have to leave Hallmark, because Hallmark is, a privately owned company, family owned, very deeply entrenched in Kansas City, very, very focused on and invested in the community. I mean, all beautiful things, but there weren't many executives who really could do their jobs from other places.
And at what point in the company were you? What was your title at that point?
I was a vice president.
Vice president. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was on a trajectory to corporate officer at the time that I decided to move to Dallas. And when I knew that I was on that trajectory, but I didn't really know how long it would be before that opportunity would become available.
Mm-hmm.
But I had been working toward it, but I realized I had a really important choice to make, either reestablish family for myself and my children, which was a priority for me, or, don't do that in exactly that way and keep moving till I got to corporate officer. And I, of course, chose to focus on my family. I did share the information that I was going to move to Dallas, and I knew that my career path would change as a result. I didn't realize at that time that I told them that I was about 6 months from that corporate officer job.
Wait, they told you that once you gave them your decision?
Well, I knew, because 6 months after I shared my decision, that job became available, the one that I had been working toward.
They didn't tell you that it might be opening up sooner than you thought? All right,
no, and probably.
This is sort of kind of a moot point. It's so hypothetical.
Yeah.
But let's play. Do you think it might have changed your decision?
No, I actually think it would have just I would have made the same decision. It would have just been more painful.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that was, for me, that was,
yeah, they wouldn't let you work remote.
That was kind of divine intervention in a way, like the way I think about it, because it's the fact that I didn't know freed me to make the best decision for my life. And now when I think about how my life is, I have absolutely zero regrets. But at the time, if I had known, that would have been really hard, really, really hard for me.
All right. So I have to ask this question. Don't hate me because I'm beautiful. That's
no, I won't.
Okay. So as 2 women that are thought leaders, right, that we don't care about the stereotype. Like, I don't care about the glass, like none of that. All that's irrelevant to me, except for the fact that it's relevant to everybody else. Okay. But that's their problem, not mine, but gross oversimplification.
Okay.
I have to ask this question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can share with us why you felt you had to make the move for his career, as opposed to him moving to Kansas City. You're a rock star. You are setting the world on fire.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question and a fair one. And I do have an answer for you, because of course we discussed that and debated that. Number one, Dallas actually held more opportunity for me, big picture and longer term, than a place like Kansas City, which is just a smaller, metro, and a much more insulated metro. Like everybody kind of knows each other, kind of thing.
Look, as a native New Yorker, I get the big city appeal.
Yeah. So that's one.
Twice. Yeah.
That's one. The second part is some of the children had family in Dallas already.
Okay. Game changer.
Yeah. There were grandparents here. There were other parents who were here, like a step parent whose family was here in Dallas. So the kids already, had family. So it just made the most sense.
So when you were in Kansas City, was it just you and the children? So you were really pulling the single mom gig?
My ex was there.
He was.
with his wife at the time that I made that decision, but she had family in Dallas. So when I just thought about all the connections for the children, Dallas made more sense.
Last inappropriate personal question. So in many divorce settlements, though, right, especially because we work with all executives, but we're trying to lift up the women executives, and we face different challenges than men. Like it or not, it's true. Did you have to get his permission because of the divorce agreement to move the children out of state?
There was definitely a process.
Okay, so I saw for the listeners, it's the first time I saw Tara be less than platinum in her expression. Okay, but you did it, like everything else, but you did. Yes. All right, so now you're in Dallas, without doubt, you're not a big sports fan, but I am. So without my beloved Dallas Cowboys. And so take us from Dallas to where you are today.
Yeah, gosh, I've been in Dallas almost a decade. And when I first moved here, I was still working for Hallmark, just in a different capacity. I was corporate culture advisor.
So you were bumped off that C-suite track.
Right. I was bumped off that. Well, yeah, I left that track. And then
I don't think you would not have wanted to have voluntarily left that track.
No, but I knew when I decided to move that I was not going to be on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew at that time. Yeah. So I was doing kind of an in-house consulting arrangement for a little bit. And meanwhile, I was building my network, and building my thought leadership platform and sharing my perspectives and ideas on places like LinkedIn, et cetera, and starting to just write more. So I started a consultancy. I initially was doing leadership development work, primarily with women. I realized that there were a lot more opportunities to do that with a lot of people who existed on what I call dimensions of difference. So whether it be women or people of color or anybody who doesn't necessarily represent the leadership norm.
Is that your term, dimensions of difference? I love that.
Well, that's the way that I talk about it. I can't say
trademark that. I
can't say that I have never heard it before. It's just the way that I talk about it.
It's like what I said earlier. It's what I said earlier. I don't know if I don't think.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't really know.
I love that. Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
But leadership development, really. And then I started working with executives on culture work because I'm so passionate about culture work. Here's what I realized. In leadership development, where I was helping individual women, for instance, right, develop their capacity to lead, I hit this wall where I recognized that I could develop those women till I was blue in the face. But if the soil, right, the culture within which they were attempting to lead was not supportive, we were only going to get so far. So I shifted to culture work because I felt like if you have a vine in a vineyard, I felt like my opportunity to impact the vineyard was more sustainable and would really support the women in ways that didn't require me to teach them how to be different than they were. So I shifted to culture work for that reason, and I have loved it ever since.
So that to me, you're addressing now, you didn't use the term, but you're addressing your work in inclusivity.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so go there with that, because I know you talk about the Waymakers, and I'll tell you what I was struck about your work. You talk about I wrote it down. In your book, you talk about that you like to look at it because you were really talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. You were just ahead of the curve, just ahead, right? Now it's the buzzword. Honestly, I work with companies. I'm not so sure how much is real and how much is talk. A little sidebar, and I might get myself into trouble with this, but I have to tell you one thing. I find it so disingenuous when companies have male keynote speakers lead the women's initiatives, even on how to have men be champions of change for women. Are you kidding me? Anyway, that's my little 2-second rant. 2-second rant.
Yeah.
So, right. So, if you want to deal with the differences and you want to create empathy, right? You want someone that's walking the talk, that's experienced it. So they can bring somebody into the fold, if you will, that even though they don't have that experience, you can create empathy. You can be seen, you can be heard, you can be understood. So you talk about your book not just being about equity and inclusion, but here's the part I love, but you say it's about leadership. So connect the dots for the listener on how you define leadership and what part of leadership is about, or it is the overarching for the equity and inclusion.
Yeah, I love this question. I think the way we used to think, or some companies still are thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, is as though they have multiple priorities. One is about the business, one is about talent, one is about process, and then they also have this other pillar that's about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of them are still looking at it that way, and because they're
compartmentalized.
Yeah. And because they're looking at it that way, I think they're making decisions about what's most important when they are putting these things in a hierarchy, right? And they're deciding, I'm going to get to that later, or I'm going to do just a little on that and then more on this. But what I really believe is that leaders of the future must be equitable. They must be inclusive, or they will not be able to attract or retain talent. Because as I'm sure you know, 85% of Generation Z, right, says that a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace is very important to them. Not just a little, but very important to them. So if you want to attract talent in the future, if you want to retain that talent, I think you have to lead in ways that create safe spaces for every single person to bring the whole of who they are to work, but also to contribute fully and to really unleash that potential. So to me, leadership of the future is equitable and inclusive.
So, okay. So so in other words, you can't be a leader without this aspect of your leadership. And as you say it, Tara, I'm sitting here thinking, well, of course.
Makes perfect sense.
But like most things, like common sense, it's the least common of senses.
So true.
In the Waymakers, you talk about a strategy, a system that you created to bring this into the workplace. So share with us three invaluable tips.
Yeah.
To be a waymaker in the land of waymakers.
Very good. So the first thing I would say, Dr. Patty-Ann, is that anybody can be a waymaker if they have insight, access, or know of opportunity that might benefit another person who has been kind of left out or removed from those critical factors, right, that create healthy careers. The way I think about this is in any entity, there is a circle of power. Whoever is in power has the insight, the unwritten rules, the stakes in the ground, the access, the power networks, the knowledge centers, and the opportunity. And the more different you are from those people in power, here we're kind of talking about proximity bias, affinity bias, the more different you are from the people in power, again, the further removed you are from all those things. So leaders who have any of those things, that information, et cetera, can really reach out and draw in, can share those things intentionally. Waymaking, or leading more equitably and inclusively, is not about looking at people who are different and saying, oh, look at those poor people. I feel so bad for them. I'm going to go be nice to them and buy them pizza on Friday. It's really about making sure that they're visible in the important conversations, decision-making, products, marketing, communications, right? Levels of leadership.
Have a voice, have a voice.
Right, exactly. Making sure they're respected for not only who they are, which is great, but also what they know and what they can do. Making sure they're valued with pay and opportunity, but also appreciation. And then making sure they feel protected, that they feel psychologically safe. They can bring up their big ideas and push back on the status quo. So the three things I tell people they should do is, one, get a really honest assessment of what their people are experiencing at work today. Not what they feel
how do you
or
suggest
think.
they do? Oh, right. I mean, the higher up you go in a company, the more removed they are from reality, right?
Yeah,
And
they can do experience surveys. They can do
right.
like
The
an
NPS score to me
survey.
just blows my mind. You ask one question, you get a number. Really? So talk about that experiential survey, because I was also struck by your commitment cycle. And to me, you just simplified how to create core values. To me,
right.
it screamed of core values to me. And
I like to make things easy.
Right, because if you're a genius, you have to make it look hard. Otherwise, if you make it look easy, then people know you're not such a genius, right? I
think geniuses can make hard things look easy.
Oh no, by definition, a genius makes it. You know what I mean, though, right?
Yes, I do.
But because I help so many companies create their core values, and it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And so talk about the commitment cycle or the experiential cycle, but both of them at some point discussed, because I think they're brilliant.
Well, thank you so much. But to go in on the experience survey, I'm actually going to share an analogy that I think really helps people get it. So a lot of companies, as you well know, do employee engagement surveys. Right. The issue with some of those questions is they ask questions on the level of the sentiment. So for instance, let's say you're in a long-term partnership, right? Like you're in a long-term partnership and you decide that you're going to leave that person. The leaving the person is the outcome. If you left because you didn't trust them, the not trusting them is the sentiment. But there were experiences you had with that person that made you not trust them. So when in our workplaces, we ask, do you believe we care about diversity and inclusion? Do you think your manager cares about you? Do you think, when we ask questions like that, we're asking sentiment-based questions. We're not really finding out what people are experiencing every day that are leading them to the given sentiment that is leading them to exit. So experience surveys ask better questions. They say things like answer yes or no, or to what degree. I receive productive feedback on my performance. Or, right, I believe my manager knows what I am contributing. Like, these are the kinds of things that lead to whether we feel seen, respected, valued, and protected. So getting a sense of the experience is really important. And we can do that with surveys, but we can also do it with listening sessions and just conversations with people. And then on the side of the commitment cycle.
Hang on 1 second, though. Let's go back to the experience, because and again, I might get myself into trouble, but I always have to be honest, because I don't know any other way to be. So I always tell people, and I tell the executives this, and I tell people I coach this: an exit interview is nonsense. Do not tell them anything in an exit interview unless they're paying you as a consultant, because if they cared about what you thought, you may not be exiting. That's my first thing. Now, to go along the line.
I clapped for people who can't see me.
Okay. Thank you. I'm telling you, I'm brutally honest. Now, to go along the lines of what you said, which I love, is when I'll give an example from what, not as eloquently as you said, but I'm leaving because you don't trust me. That tells you nothing. So what I say to people is, I'm leaving because you don't trust me, as evidenced by.
Exactly.
The three words, as evidence. As evidence. So we're saying the same thing. And
yes, we are. We're saying people need to focus more on the evidence, the experience, than they do on the sentiment.
Especially when you're talking about feelings. You can feel a certain way, but this sounds like an oxymoron, but to quantify the feeling, it has to be evident. And that's a whole other conversation. conversation.
Exactly. But I
Evidence-based.
get exactly
Yeah.
where you're going. And that is precisely the way I talk about it with people. I was working with one company and they showed me their inclusion index, which is basically the scores on inclusion specific questions in their engagement survey. And they were really high. Well, we also did an experience survey. And when they saw the results of the experience survey, they were completely counter to what their inclusion index would suggest. And I said, that's because you can ask me, do you feel safe talking about race at work? I can say yes. And then what I would say to you as a consultant is, so what?
Mm-hmm.
So
I would
what?
hope so. I would hope so. Yeah.
So what if I feel comfortable talking about race at work? That doesn't mean I feel I have an equal chance to succeed. That doesn't mean I'm getting the coaching I need. That doesn't mean I feel like people trust me to do a good job. That doesn't mean any of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what I'm trying to break down for leaders. Stop asking questions that don't take you anywhere. Instead, get a good sense of what people are experiencing and how those experiences are impacting their emotions.
Well, it also suggests that it's an either or. It's a
Right.
false choice. I mean, most of life is not yes or no. All of it's almost all of life is lived in the gray. To what degree of gray on the spectrum do you lie?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So commitment cycle. I could talk about that.
So commitment cycle is my favorite way to get, especially high level leaders who usually like to get in there and get out. Yeah, right. You know, because you work with them too. They're not super patient when you bring them together to talk about things like this. So what I do,
because I feel they don't really understand the ROI. If they understood the ROI, they'd have those sleeves rolled up. They'd be digging in the train, which also
they
shows
would be
part of the
swimming
work,
in it.
right?
Yeah.
If they really believed that diversity, that women, and we complement each other, that's the superpower, not trying to be the same, the difference.
Yeah, I know it is. It's true. It makes everything better. It makes your decisions better, right? It creates better outcomes. And we know that on certain kinds of diversity, like diversity of thought, is easier for us sometimes to say, oh, well, if somebody is a fixer and somebody is a visionary and somebody is right, we can look at that and say, yeah, that gets you to a better place. But somehow lived experiences, we don't think that's as valuable, when in fact, especially CPG companies, et cetera, it's extraordinarily valuable because most of these high level leaders have an extremely narrow lens. But that aside, the commitment cycle is, I think, a really straightforward and even fun, to be honest, way to visualize the future. So I really just ask them out front, you know, if 2 years from now you were exactly the company you wanted to be, what would that look like, feel like, be like? And I just ask them to share words and phrases that describe their ideal workplace culture. When they do that, I write it all down. I read it back to them as though it were some perfectly articulated statement, even though it's not, because I'm a poet underneath all of this stuff and it's not hard for me to do that. And then I say, if we want to achieve that, how do you have to behave? What are you going to have to do differently, say and do in order to get there? And so then they share a bunch of behaviors, but then it gets really powerful, to your point, because we ask everybody in this space, what do you individually need in order to behave that way? If people are asking you to trust more, if people are asking you, right, to listen better, blah, 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 what do you, Dr. Patty Ann, need in order to do that? Each person has to answer. And then lastly, what are you willing to commit in service of this shared vision? So it gets people all around the cycle, from defining their preferred culture, to naming the new or evolved behaviors, to being really specific about what they're going to need, and ultimately what they're willing to commit. So there's accountability kind of built into the process.
Well, and I love so much about that. And let's talk for a minute about the piece that I always harp on. Whenever anybody loves to complain in either a personal or a business relationship to me, they don't this, let's go with trust. Let's go with trust. Okay. They're not trustworthy. I don't trust them. They're not trustworthy. They don't trust me. I don't know why they don't trust me. So my first question is always, well, are you trustworthy?
Mm-hmm.
Now, honestly, it's not such a genius question. It's sort of kind of Captain Obvious, but the pause the silence can be deafening, because
Yes.
what most, and then the other piece is, are you trusting?
Mhm.
So are you worthy of someone's trust, and are you willing to trust them? Right.
Yep.
So whenever you talk about what you want, when it comes to change or in anything in life, I always tell people, if I'm giving a keynote, I say, pick up your phone, take a selfie, put it away. 5 minutes later, I come back to it. Who's responsible for how your life works? Pick up that selfie. If you want change, what are you willing to do to take personal responsibility for it? If you're in a fight, if you're in an antagonistic relationship with people at work, well, there's no such thing as a one-handed clap. You play some role in that, even if it's only 1%. I can't fight with someone that won't have a fight with me. It's impossible.
That is a whole word. It's the way I usually talk about it. I love what you're saying is I ask people, is any part, so here's where I get it a lot. This is the feedback I got. They said this about me, this about me, this about me. And then of course those thoughts and beliefs bring up all these emotions. And I usually say, okay, hold on. Ask yourself first, is any part of that true? And your answer, you might feel like your answer is no, but you always have to first ask yourself, which is kind of your question about, are you trustworthy? Is any part of that true? That should always be your very first question before you get hijacked and go all the way down the road on it.
Right.
And I think the other thing that I bring into it, which I think is interesting, is, Dr. Henry Cloud's book, Boundaries.
Mhm.
Like, I realize being responsible for your choices and your outcomes doesn't necessarily mean that there are not very real external factors at play. We know there are real external factors at play, but ultimately most of the time we have choices. So we may not be able to change the circumstance we're in, but we can change our circumstance.
I was gonna say, but we have a choice to be in that circumstance or not.
Right, exactly. I'm talking about the workplace. Of course,
You
that's
have
not
a
true
choice
for every
to
single
walk.
human. Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
right away and not
right.
impulsively, but who is it? Was it Eleanor Roosevelt that said, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission?
Yeah, I know. I love
Right?
that. Have you been watching The First Lady, by the way?
No, what is that?
I think it's on Showtime. Anyway, you need to Google that.
Oh, okay. I will. I'll have to write it down because I never remember.
Good.
The other thing, talk about boundaries, okay? People don't, and sometimes I feel like women have a more difficult time with this because we have a difficult time saying no because we're afraid we won't be liked, even though
Yeah.
it's not a popularity contest. It's nice to be liked, but you have to be respected. Women do not respect their own boundaries at times. And it's not a martyr type of statement. It can be in a very benign little way. For example, you and I, let's say we're in a work setting right now, right? And you and I are in the middle of a conference call, and I get that ping notification, which you shouldn't have on during a conference call, but let's say you do. And it says, hey, I need help with blah, blah. Can you help me with blah, blah, blah? Women will think, oh, gee, it's almost 4:00. I really want to be done at 5. I got to pick up the kids. Oh, and then, sure, when I'm done.
Yeah.
And then you stay late, and then you run late, or your work doesn't get done. Where are your boundaries? Where a man will say is, no, I don't have time. But not, and again, a generalization, I think you and I have learned, actually, you have 6 kids, I have 4 kids. Kids were the best thing for me to create boundaries, because for years, I would have to leave work at 2:00 and go pick the kids up from school, bring them home, and then go back to work.
Yeah.
It was really a great lesson in setting boundaries.
Right. I mean, you don't have a choice. There are circumstances where you have to set them. And I think when you become a leader, you recognize the power in setting boundaries successfully because it models that for other people.
Exactly.
And I've always taken that very much to heart. The way I set boundaries for myself is the way that my team will probably set boundaries for themselves because they're following my lead. They're trying to understand the norms. So we have a major responsibility, to me, to make a way for other people consciously and intentionally, but also just by how we live and lead every single day.
Exactly, exactly. So I could speak with you forever, but I do want to respect your time. So I just have one or two more questions. First
Sure.
question is, what's the last book you've reread and why? What?
Okay. So
Is
I
it
love
yours?
one of my favorite books is Rage Becomes Her by
Mm.
Soraya Shamali.
Mhm.
And while I don't often read the entire thing again because it's a very long book, I refer to it and kind of skim through it often. It, if you haven't read it, you
I
really
have
should
not.
read it. It is
I have
a
a movie to
brilliant,
watch and a book to read. Rage.
yeah, Rage Becomes Her. It's a brilliant piece of work. It's very well researched. It's really, I'll say, kind of goes back in history, talking about women's rights, the state of women, in the world, helps us understand how women's lives and work have kind of evolved over time. And then more important, I think, calls our attention to some of the risks that are in front of us if we don't lead and live a little bit more consciously.
As women or as a society that doesn't value women?
As society in general. But I think for women, it's one of those books you read where you're like, okay, I'm not crazy.
So it's valid.
I mean,
Validating.
very validating, but brilliantly written and great stories. Like, it's honestly just a really good. Soraya tells a story of when her daughter was young and was in preschool or something like that. And every day she would go in and build this castle. I hate to give it away, but I'm going to tell you because there are so many other great stories too.
Okay.
Goes and builds this castle, and this little boy day after day would come and knock the castle down. And so her daughter would come home crying, "You knocked my castle down." And she'd go in the next day and build the castle again. And finally, Soraya went in to talk to the teacher and the parents about why is he knocking this castle down. And everybody was kind of like, "Oh, he's just being a boy. And
Boys will be boys.
he just can't help himself. And, see this beautiful castle. He just feels the need to just knock it down. He can't help me. He doesn't mean anything by it." And she talks about what a powerful moment that was for her as a mother to recognize that she needed to help her daughter set boundaries and honor her own boundaries. And if she was convincing her daughter at that moment to just accept someone's destruction of her hard work because he can't help himself, what other messages might that send her in the future? Isn't that, it's so good.
Well, I have to say, I am going to go over time, I'm sure of it. But so in my second book, Money Can Buy You Happiness, Secrets Women Need to Know to Get Paid What They're Worth, I talk about the 10 reasons why women don't get paid what they're worth. Spoiler alert, the number one reason is we don't ask.
Right.
But along the way, what happens is that women and boys and girls are raised differently.
Yeah.
We're raised to wait in line, wait your turn,
right.
Wait for the boy to call, wait for your work to be noticed, wait to get the promotion. You'll be waiting for Godot, right?
Amen.
And we're also, in terms of behavior, and there is difference with testosterone and estrogen, and I'm not going to get into that, but when a boy acts aggressively, boys will be boys. When a girl acts aggressively, "Oh, sweetheart, come here." That's not ladylike.
That's exactly right.
And I remember, and I'm not that old, Tara, I'm not that old, but I was the first girl on my block, because I was raised in Brooklyn, to wear high top black Converse sneakers with the star on the side. It was scandalous.
It was a scandal, wasn't it?
It was and my parents, bless them, they didn't see the big deal in it. To this day, there's a part of me that doesn't understand what. So you have a and I don't. So, the part of me that really doesn't get it. I mean, what I do. But growing up, I'm like, I want to play basketball. I can't play basketball on Mary Jane's or whatever the hell they were called. I need sneakers. Yeah. There were no girl sneakers. Okay, so I'll wear the boy sneakers. Scandalous. So exactly to what you're saying. All right, my question. What is the one most important thing in life that you've learned in all the incredible things that you've done that you want the listeners to know, that they have to know? One.
Yeah. I want to learn that the only way, I want to share what I've learned. The only way we get to a better outcome, whatever that outcome is by getting off the fence and into the arena. I really feel like I have learned that when I aspire to greater heights, when I want to try to achieve something or learn something or meet someone, that sitting back in my safe place and watching it from a distance and hoping for it is never, ever, ever going to get me there. And it honestly is the same lesson that's in the Waymakers book. If anybody's out there and they want to create a more equitable and inclusive culture, you're not going to do it by sitting on the fence, watching it and wishing it would be different. The only way we get to anything great is together and is with intention.
It's one of the best. I can't remember who said it, but some basketball star said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, and don't play into your limited beliefs. So
you got to get in the game.
Get in the game and give it your all. So how can people learn more about you, find out more about you? They absolutely have to get your Waymakers book. So please, where should they go?
Well, you can find the Waymakers on Amazon or anywhere books are sold online, but they can also find me at tarajayefrank.com. And then I'm really active on LinkedIn as well. Those are probably the best places to find me.
Okay, great. So thank you. Thank you so much, Tara, for being an incredible guest. And that concludes today's podcast episode of The Trust Doctor, Restoring Trust and Enriching Significant Relationships. And as promised, Tara took us for a ride. So make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And we'll see you next time. Be well.
Once again, we've concluded another great episode of The Trust Doctor with Dr. Patty Ann. Tune in next week for more insights and advice on how you can create, nurture, and sustain healthy relationships. To find out more about the podcast, visit drpattyann.com/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, review, and share. Until next time.